Hi, everyone. Well, here's another week gone by, and here's another childbirth tip and trend for the year 2025. I love doing these videos because after 50 years of being involved in birth, we have this new technology called YouTube. Have you been a woman in labor and the contraction's been intense, and someone has said to you, just relax? Now, you may have said this or you may have thought it. One is, shut up. The other is, you try. And the other is, I'm trying. That's really, really common. Now, if you're somebody who's at a birth with a woman and you see that she is so tense, you want her to relax. So you say to her, just relax. And she turns around to you and she glares at you and goes, shut up. You try. I'm trying. Therefore, what conclusion do we make from this? And that is the word relax is complicated. And when you're in the throes of active labor contractions and it's intense and you lack skills, it is really hard to do what you know you should be doing and what others see that you need to be doing. So we're going to talk about that today. I was fortunate enough in the early 70s to work with hundreds and hundreds of mothers and fathers, many of them very religious, most of them medically high risk. And at that point in the United States, 95% of us were laboring. Big issue. It is not because we all do it well, or we all have good outcomes, or we all would like it, and it's just something that happens to us. It is that the medical profession was not that sophisticated back then. And the reality was, throughout time, we have accepted the death of babies at birth, but we don't want mothers to die. So the medical profession in the 70s and prior to that did a classical cesarean to save a woman's life. But if a baby died, it was still culturally accepted. But getting back to that, because 95% of us labored, some of us had short births, some very long births, some didn't feel the pain very much. Most of us found it really intense, and many of us thought we were going to die. And so as mothers and fathers and myself as a body worker, we began to look at the Lamaze classes that were being taught all over the United States from the late 50s and the Bradley classes that were being taught as well, and how they were dealing with the word relax. In another video, I talked about breathing, so you can go find that in this playlist. Let me tell you of my experience in working in multiple cultures throughout my life. Every language has two words. One is relax, and the other is soften. And the reality is none of us know how to relax. It's not a word that we actually can really use. That's why meditation is so powerful, because it teaches us to do something other than to be very tense. People can use herbs, they can use homeopathics, or they can go around and still feel quite tense. It's very, very common. When you're in labor and labor contractions get more painful, it is really, really hard to relax your body when you are feeling pain. Anybody who has had pain of any type knows that it's hard to relax when you're feeling pain. And that's why the medical profession gives you painkillers, and in birth gives women painkillers. Those have changed. They're now epidural, so women can be awake and feel part of a birth, but their pain is being numbed, taken away from them. So when BirthingBetter families and I developed the skills in the early 1970s, we were dealing back then with the fact that 95% of us were laboring, good or bad, and we were being taught to be a rag doll on the outside, in the Lamaze particularly. And what we learned as families is being apparently relaxed on the outside had zero to do with what was going on the inside. And our baby needed us to know what was going on the inside because the baby had to move down through and out our inside, as well as open our cervix. We didn't always know really where our cervix was, and we really didn't know what our birth canal was, although many of us have been taught there's this ring of fire, but that's really at the end of the journey. So we had to think, and then we had to experiment, and then we had to try, and then we had to rethink. And the good news is this, and it's only good news from here on. Do you blink? Do you cough? Can you tighten up your rectum? Whether you're a woman or a man, you can do that. So right now, I want you to do what I'm doing, is sit here with relaxed shoulders, and I want you to tighten up your rectum. You don't have to raise your shoulders to do that. You don't have to look any different. In fact, tighten up more down there, not just the rectum, between your sit bones. And if you're a woman, in your vagina. And if you're a man, in the perineum. Tighten up down there. You can be tight. Now that's conscious tension. We know we have it. So I want you to now just relax that. Relax what you can. Relax around your rectum, your perineum, relax in your vagina. Now we're back sort of at a neutral place to some degree because you've consciously let go of the tension that you consciously created. Okay. Now I want you to tighten up your shoulders. That's it. And you can still be relaxed down there. So external tension is not relevant to the birth. It's internal tension. And it turns out we have 4 of them. And that's what BirthingBetter families discovered. We have conscious tension, tighten up your rectum. We have unconscious tension, you don't know it's tight. We have stretching tension, which means get down to a split right now. And we have structural tension. That means what's inside us. That's particularly relevant to the bones in our pelvis that our baby has to open up and move down through, particularly around where the top of the vagina, which has the cervix in the middle, attaches to the inside of the bony pelvis, and our birth canal. Lots of places that we have tension that are structural tensions that we know nothing about. And what BirthingBetter families did was we discovered them, and then we could figure out what to do about them. So when we say to a woman in labor, just relax, that's a general statement. And women can't do that. They don't know what you're talking about. Relax my shoulders, stop clenching my butt. What are you talking about? Relax my mind? What are you talking about? And the fact is, we have to know where. All of the relaxation that we need to do is inside our bony pelvis and inside our birth canal. The bony pelvis, most of us think, is just one bone. Some of us may realize that we have a sacrum, that triangular bone that's attached to our spine that somehow is part of our pelvis. And there's no embarrassment about that. Why would we know? But when we don't know, when it comes to birth, then that's a hindrance. So there are actually 4 bones in your pelvis. Do you know what they are? You can look, get an image of them. One is our tailbone. That does play a role in birth, but only once the baby has moved down through the open cervix. The sacrum, which is that triangular bone at the end of our spine, that plays a huge role in birth, but we don't often know how or why or what to do with it. And then there are the big bones to our pelvis, which are spread out all over the place. One part of them overlays the corners of the sacrum. If you've ever heard the expression the PSIS joint, that's it. But that then becomes part of the big hip blade. But the bones you're sitting on are part of that big hip blade. And then that hip blade wraps around the front and becomes one side or the other of our pubic bone or pubic arch. So the big bones in our pelvis are in the front, on the side, and in the back, and down below. That makes us think, where are they? Now, it turns out that the bone that moves the most and is most important is the sacrum. And most of us wouldn't have a clue how to move it. And yet every time we step forward with one foot, that sacrum moves a little bit in this direction, diagonally. But right now, while you're sitting there, you can tuck your tail. You can feel the top of that triangle push out a little bit as the tail tucks under. And you can feel when you tuck the tail that the muscles on each side of your tail become tighter. And those muscles, you can sort of feel are attached to the bones you sit on. Now you can untuck your tail, and as you untuck it, you feel change in the inside of your body. Those muscles to the sit bones expand, and you might feel a slight arch in your lower back. And you can feel that the sacrum is moving out like this. When your baby has opened the cervix and is coming down into the top of the birth canal, the baby often pushes the sacrum out because the baby has to turn on the inside of the sacrum in order to face the birth canal. Because where your bones are that you sit on, and the tailbone and your pubic arch, what's in the middle is your rectum. So if your baby were coming out your rectum, it would come straight down, but it doesn't. It pushes out the sacrum so that it can turn under the sacrum and push and open your vagina. When I first gave birth in 1970, we all lay on our back with feet up in stirrups. And everybody in the natural birth movement says it's an anti-gravity position. And that's correct. But get in that position when you finish listening to this. You're wide open, but you're not in gravity. Now get into the semi-recumbent position that the natural birth movement advocated, which was sitting on your sacrum. So what happens when we sit on our sacrum? We make it impossible for our sacrum to move back and out by the baby's motions. And it's almost impossible for the baby to turn the corner and come out of our vagina. And what you see is women lifting, which tightens those muscles and makes it harder. So when the natural birth movement gave a tip and a trend to sit in a semi-recumbent position, unintentionally, because they're not body workers, they block the descent of the baby through the birth canal. And women would push until they popped the vessels in their eyes. That should tell you something. So don't sit on your sacrum. Don't fix your sacrum, which means if you have back labor, do not have anybody push on your sacrum, because your baby is causing the back labor because your baby's trying to make your sacrum mobile by using the birth hormones. So when you're pregnant from 24 weeks, begin to tuck your tail, untuck your tail, and make your sacrum mobile. And when you think about positions to get into, and this is about labor, not about cesareans at the moment, then get into positions and make certain that your sacrum is flexible. And when you're in labor, have your partner who has skills to help you, whether you have a doula or not, remind you, is your sacrum flexible? In which case, flex it. Make it flexible. Now, if your baby's very high in the pelvis, you want to untuck your tail. Do you? That's closing that upper spot. So you want to tuck your tail and open up the top of your sacrum. Now, before I go further, I want to ask you a question. How much room does a baby need if it's stuck? So put your thumb and finger together. Can't slide it, that's stuck. So how much room does it need? That much room? Most people don't need, nah. They think that much room. They think that to that is unstuck. But that's not accurate. Stick, okay, that's stuck. Now, what I want you to do without taking your fingers apart, without ever moving them apart, just soften in them. And then soften some more. And one more time, soften. Now slide your thumb and index finger. That's all your baby needs. What word did I use? I didn't use relax. I use soften, because that is what our connective tissue responds to. And what's our connective tissue? Our connective tissue is what holds us all together. So when I'm asking you to tuck your tail, you are using muscles in your connective tissue, ligaments and tendons, but you're using the other stuff called the fascia. If you ever look at spare ribs, you have that white stuff. That's the fascia. If you pull the skin off of chicken, that holds it together with the fascia. We're all held together with the fascia. And because I'm a body worker and worked with fascia, it was the inside connective tissue that we need to learn to soften in order for us to use skills while we're in the throes of intense labor contractions. Now, some people will say, but we can't. I don't like it. It's horrible. It hurts. That's what your mind's saying. But your mind has the capacity to go and say terrible things while we do positive things. If you're a parent, you know this. There are days where you want to kill your kid. Honestly, you know you can't, but you have terrible feelings about what they are doing. So what do? You employ skills, positive skills, hopefully, rather than hurting them. People who hurt their children just lack skills. It's a gap. And you can easily learn skills not to hurt your children when they're doing things you don't like. But your mind still acknowledges you don't like it. In labor, it's the same way. You can hate every single second of it and use your mind to remember to flex your sacrum and to make space for your baby. Now, let's talk about your cervix for a minute. Where is your cervix? Well, men know where it is because often they bump into it, but the top of our vagina is where our cervix is. And what's the top of our vagina? Well, if you took it out, our intestines would fall out. So the top of our vagina separates what's up from what's down. Where is it attached? Well, the easiest place to find it is where your hip bones meet that big hip plate. Where your leg bone meets that big hip plate. It's attached on the inside there. And if you draw a circle, it's sort of midway around your sacrum and midway into your pubic bone. And that is where the top of your vagina is, with the cervix hanging down into your vagina and your uterus above it getting bigger in pregnancy. Your uterus sends a message, a wave, a contraction, which isn't a great word for it because that assumes it's doing that. It's what we feel like it's doing, but it's actually tugging open the cervix. And the first thing that it does when it tugs it open is to soften the tissue at the top of your vagina, shorten that cervix until it's flush with the top of your vagina, and then it retracts that tissue into where your leg bone meets your hip, into the mid part of your sacrum, and the mid part of your pubic bone. That retraction is what causes the pain. Men get it. That is the hole in the penis. If that were coming through it, it would hurt. And men would prepare for it because they can see it coming down. Women, it's inside us. We can't see it. So when we talk about the need for women to relax in intense labor pains, what we really mean is we need you to soften inside your bony pelvis. How do you do that? That's a great question. So here's the tips and trends of 2025 that has existed since time and will exist into the future. You need to soften inside your right hip. And you just did that. Soften inside your sacrum. And you just did that. Soften inside your left hip. And you just did that. Soften inside your pubic bone, your lower belly. And you just did that. Now, let me say it to you a different way. Soften inside your right hip, soften inside your sacrum, soften inside your left hip, soften inside your pubic bone. You couldn't do that. I can't do that. No one can do that because it takes a pause for our brain to get down there and tell this connective tissue what to do. So it's always a pause, soften inside a specific area, not everywhere. And it doesn't matter if you're softening your shoulders. It's only down there that you need to soften. Soften on one side of your pubic bone. Made a mistake. Soften on one side of your tailbone. Soften on the other side of your tailbone. Soften in the back of your rectum. So change your word. Don't use relax. Use soften. And when you say to somebody, soften in your right hip, do it for yourself. And then you'll know when to direct them somewhere else. Now, there's a lot more to how to soften during labor contractions. But I'm coming to the end of this talk, and so I need to stop. I may do another one on more of it, but right now, just practice. Self-learn this skill. We call it the pelvic clock. It can be done anytime in between contractions, at the beginning of one. Less likely that you're going to do it at the peak of a contraction, but as the contraction's easing off, do it again. Because the more you can soften in your pelvis, the more you can move your sacrum and move your hip bones as well. So thank you for listening today. If you like this video, please subscribe to our channel and please pass it on. I've spent 50 years trying to get this message out. And often it isn't heard because we have a childbirth message that is strongly coming from a natural birth viewpoint, which is not wrong. It just has gaps. And one of the gaps is a belief that women know how to birth. We will birth because 100% of us who are pregnant are going to birth. However, it is now time that we grow a self-learning skilled birthing population, and you can spread the word. You can look online for diverse skills-based methods. BirthingBetter is one of them. BirthingBetter is unique because it was created by people like you and I, and it doesn't come from a philosophy around natural birth or medical birth. It just comes from our universal. 100% of us who are pregnant will give birth one way or another. And we believe strongly from our experience of 50 years that all of us should self-learn some birth and birth coaching skills and then use those skills to work through the activity of birthing our baby. And why is that? Because the birth of our baby is important to us, each of us. And it's a one-off. It can't be replayed. It's incredibly infrequent. And it leaves birth memories as a birth story for the rest of your life. So when you labor and you use skills, you will always birth better and have a better birth story to tell others. So see you again next week. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.